Hi, I'm Ramsey Lewis. When pursuing a career in the arts, music in particular, I found that believing in the 4 P's is a must. Practice, perseverance, patience, and performance. To be a success in music, one must stay the course of action, persevere. To polish one's skill, one must practice, practice, practice. Remain calm, tolerate delay, endure difficulty or inconvenience, and understand what it means to have patience. And then to become comfortable playing in front of an audience, one must perform, perform, perform. These concepts are ages old, but as you will see in our program, Art Porter Sr. found value in them, and they served him well. Arthur Lee Porter was born into a strong Christian household of deep moral convictions. His father, Eugene Porter Sr., was a skilled stonemason and semi-professional baseball player who married Lily Mae Warren in their hometown of Patterson, Louisiana. Using his savings and his entrepreneurial instincts, Eugene brought his new wife to Little Rock, Arkansas, where he began to build a contracting business and raise a family. 2 sons soon enriched the Porters' lives. First, Eugene Jr., and 2 years later, on February 8, 1934, Arthur Lee. Lily Mae doted on her 3 men. She was a devoted homemaker who urged Eugene to look after his younger brother, a task that lovingly became a lifelong commitment.
My mother called him Arthur Lee, and she called me Junior. He and I learned the crawling, walking, sharing experiences at the same time. I was a little older, so therefore I could hold his hand and help him up the steps and down the steps and so forth. But my mother always let me know, always hold your brother's hand, because look at him. He's depending on you to be there. He's not going to fall because you're standing there. And this sort of started this hand-holding Arthur Eugene together. I did not know that I would be following Arthur for the number of years that I did. Very seldom was there an instance where you would see one of us without the other, going to the store together, riding the bicycles together, playing games together. The street that we lived on was very, very close to the high school. It was close to the junior college, and it was close to the elementary school. So we had an opportunity to see teachers and doctors and lawyers at a very, very young age, and there was a certain air that each one of them had, and we would sometimes say, we want to be like him. We're going to be like him. When we grow up, we're going to be like him. My father was away from home during the day, during the working hours. When he came home in the evening, that's when we sort of brought everything to the table. Everything that was discussed, or everything that came up, this is where we discussed it all. We even discussed school, starting school with Arthur when he was 4 years old. There should be no problems. I'll be right there with him. There should be no problems.
Church attendance was a valued part of the Porter family routine. Lily Mae served in many leadership positions within the church structure. This living example of selfless service left a lasting imprint on her sons.
My mother would tell both of us, the Lord is with you, we'll be a praying home, and we'll be going to church. We started in the church. We were very, very small. We knew our way around the church. We knew everyone there at the church. And Arthur started playing piano some, but my mother had him to understand that when you play here at the church, there will be no money. My mother played piano. She played some for the church, but there were never any funds involved. She said, this is a service that I have, and I hope that you develop the same type service and always share and give what you have to the others out there.
When Art was 5, his mother tenderly introduced him to the joys of music. As a pianist herself, she recognized his promising possibilities as a concert pianist, and the family's focus turned to that dream.
My father was one, he was very, very quiet. My father enjoyed reading, and he expected me to do a lot of reading, too. Arthur had his opportunity to read, but Arthur didn't have to read very long because he would always say, well, it's time for me to practice. And when he said that, everything got quiet in the house, and he would practice, and everyone would give their attention to him.
Art gave his first public concert at the age of 8. It became apparent to Lily Mae that Art needed a classically trained and professionally accomplished teacher. The Porters engaged a newly arrived pianist from Atlanta, Hazel Shanks Henson, a talented musician who would provide Art with the proper instruction.
That was one of the pieces that I taught Porter. It's called Warsaw Concerto by Adam Sally. He loved that because he loved to play all over the piano. I taught that to him when he was born. When he was about 14 years old, I presented him in recital at his church across in the East End, and everybody was thrilled to death to hear him play such difficult music. He was just such a loving person. I just enjoyed teaching him so much. And he would always, always remember Hazel Henson, his teacher.
Like most young musicians and athletes, Art complained about the number of practice hours required to perfect his talent.
Playing the piano was so confining. You had to practice all the time, and other guys would be out playing.
But his love of music outweighed his irritation. Practicing was part of life, and it gleefully became an acceptable way of avoiding disagreeable chores.
I started working with my father. I said, well, Dad, we need to take Arthur with us. My father said, well, you think he can take it because the sun is so hot and he's a little small? And then Arthur would start playing piano louder then to be sure that he would be home.
Anything I heard on the radio, I knew exactly what notes were being played. I had perfect pitch. I could go into a music store, look at a pop tune, and go home and play it. I take no credit for it. I just came to be able to do that. And I'm very thankful.
He was an excellent pianist. And all he had to do was see it once, and it was photographed, and he could reproduce it over and over and over again, changing whenever he got ready, and this was really remarkable to me. We had a community choir, and in the community, the kids were all come and gather around the porch. Sometimes there'd be 25 and 30 of us there. Arthur would be playing, and we'd be singing gospel songs. No rock and roll, no boogie-woogie, no blues. Rules of the house.
It was soon evident that Art Porter was a major talent. At 14, he was given his own live radio show on KLRA, where he performed 30 minutes of classical and standard favorites each week. Allison Presbyterian Church installed a new Hammond organ. Art became the church's organist after completing the Hammond organ study program. He gave his first organ recital on Easter Sunday of 1949. Growing up with the reality of segregation, Art chose to quietly overcome the inequity with dignity through education and his music. Dividing his time between school, piano, sports, and church, he developed a strong sense of community service that eventually radiated across the state. At this time, Dunbar High School was the only accredited African-American high school in Arkansas. 50% of its graduates went on to college. Art was elected president of the Student Council and served as vice president of the National Honor Society. His many activities included accompanying the choir and playing the piano for most school functions. Beautiful classmate Thelma Pauline Minton became his sweetheart and 4 years later, his wife.
Strict punctuality is perhaps the cheapest virtue which can give force to an otherwise insignificant character.
Voted the most dignified by his senior class, he carried this natural elegance throughout his life. Art turned down a full music scholarship to Howard University to be closer to home. His mother had developed a heart condition that severely limited her activities. It was decided that Art would accept a partial scholarship at AM&N College, now the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff, and Eugene would stay in Little Rock to help with her care. In spite of the limited funding of a segregated college, Art absorbed an abundance of knowledge from a dedicated faculty. Settling into college life, he continued to expand his classical repertoire and experience new challenges.
Arthur was already a musical phenomenon in Little Rock before we got to AM&N. But it was at AM&N that everybody seemed to know exactly what he could do, and they were just, it was just broadcast all over, that he was some sort of an icon. He could do anything where music was concerned. He was a genius at the keyboard.
I didn't really get into jazz until college. A good friend, John Puckett, insisted that I learn jazz, and I've been eternally grateful ever since.
When Art came to AM&N, all of his experience and training had been in classical music. He had started very early. All of my training had been in the jazz field, although I did take a legit piano, but my main experience had been with jazz. So we would exchange ideas, him helping me with classical music and me showing him different things about improvisational music.
John Puckett, and I didn't know anything about John Puckett, but Arthur told me Puckett was a good guy and he had great jazz skills. I said, if this is what you like, I said, I'll see him next week. So I came down and talked with Mr. Puckett the next week, and he was telling me how good Arthur was with the jazz and so forth. I said, well, this is great. So I got a new word to bring home now. I got to tell my mother what jazz is in words that she can understand, because if it sounds like blues, she's not going to like it. If it sounds like boogie-woogie, she's not going to like that either. I just told her it's something different. It's something very different. You ought to hear Arthur play it.
While accompanying the college's concert choir, another love appeared in his life, Handel's Messiah. 4 years of performing this stunning musical composition created a permanent implant in his heart, a sacred space he would revisit again and again. In June of 1954, he was awarded a Bachelor of Science degree in music education and accepted a teaching position at Mississippi Valley College. To their mutual delight, brother Eugene was also offered a teaching job at the same college. Together again, the brothers set up housekeeping, and the road between Little Rock and Mississippi was well traveled.
I finished high school at 16 and finished college at 20. I was teaching college at 20. I don't recommend that, by the way. I was academically ready, but not emotionally.
Art and Thelma Minton were married on June 10, 1955. A short time later, Eugene and Art were drafted into the Army and entered basic training at Fort Chaffee.
I didn't want to go. I became a teacher partly because of the deferment. I spent the first few months doing everything on earth to try to get out. Then one morning, I decided that no matter how badly I wanted to be out of here, I was still there. So I thought the best thing for me to do was to try to be happy. It's a very simple deduction, but some people never get there.
In the same basic training class was another musician, a bass player from Ohio, Carwin Pleasant. It wasn't long before Art and Carwin teamed up to give private concerts in the officers' mess for Captain Brown. Every day at 11 o'clock, while the other men were out in the field, strains of Bach and Handel were heard coming from the wardroom. Separated after basic training, Porter and Pleasant later reunited in Little Rock, where they remained close friends and fellow performers. In August of 1957, Art became a father. The little family moved to Fort Niagara, New York, where Art was a chaplain's assistant. To add to his meager income, he played piano 7 nights a week at the old Fort Inn, located outside the main gate. He was such a favorite of the customers that 10 years later, he was invited back to celebrate the old fort's 20th anniversary. Honorably discharged, Art returned to his hometown. Determined not to leave again, he accepted a faculty position at Horace Mann High School. He also accepted various musical engagements. Teacher by day and performer by night, he was constantly in motion.
During 1958, the senior high schools were closed. So we had different responsibilities because we were on the payroll during that time. So we either worked at the elementary level as substitute teachers, or we had professional assignments there at the school that the principal and his team had worked out for us. Art was equally as comfortable in working in this professional setting as he was in working in the music setting. If your profession allowed, such as Art Porter's did, you would moonlight. And actually, sometimes the moonlighting got to be a major part of finance for you.
Because of this turmoil in Little Rock schools, Hot Springs offered the most job opportunities for musicians. Many well-known names in entertainment were attracted to the private clubs and casinos operating there at the time. Joining Ralph Porter and Reggie Cravens, Art had several chances to work with major talents.
When he would go to Hot Springs, that's one of the places where I could not go because of the broad color lines. But he would come home and tell me exactly who was there, the songs he played, the other band members that were playing at the other clubs across the street, and next week we're going to change places and all of these kinds of things. I had an opportunity to sort of keep up with what was going on. You read the newspaper and you see at the Black Orchid they're going to have so-and-so, so-and-so in Hot Springs, Art Porter. Wow, felt real good.
Later that year, Art was recommended to Reverend Rufus Young for the position of resident organist with Bethel AME Church. For the next 35 years, no matter how many engagements crowded his week, Sunday morning found him at the organ giving thanks for all his gifts.
I've always known that I didn't have anything to do with my ability. The good Lord did that. So I'd be very uncomfortable not showing up on Sunday morning, particularly with the need today for church musicians.
Art became an expert at juggling the responsibilities of a growing family with teaching, performing, and service to his church and community. This ability to maintain a demanding schedule was a hallmark of his life. Quietly moving from one scene to the next, he walked in many places very well. As a music educator, Art Porter brought his calm, in-charge style to the classroom. His mastery of music and quick wit earned him the respect of his students.
He was so easygoing. He never let anything ruffle him. And that was the thing that I noticed more than anything else. I don't understand how you encounter all the things that he was encountering and not get upset, visibly upset, and let people know how you're really feeling sometimes.
Sure. He was so young. You know, he was not that much older than we were, but he still maintained the classroom. He still got out of the students the sounds that he needed. He would divide us up into sections. We would have section leaders. The older class people were the section leaders. We would go to choir trials every year, and under Mr. Porter's direction, every year we won first place.
My time in 1968 at Little Rock Parkview, you had Martin Luther King had been assassinated that year, right. Robert F. Kennedy, you had the Olympics with Evans and Smith, and the Black Power and student riots. But every day you walked in his class, it was just joy. I mean, you looked forward to going to class every single day.
That's right.
And for most of us, Mr. Porter was our first black teacher. School busing hadn't started, and the way he handled it all through his music and his demeanor, it was a pretty tense time, even in '68, maybe not compared to '59 in that area, but there was still some tensions, and he just went through all that. It was never really discussed. It just, you know, music kind of took care of all that.
He's a quiet revolutionary.
He was. He really was.
That's the word.
I hope through my performances, people have a better understanding of and appreciation of music. This was my main goal when I taught school. The more you know about something, the better position you're in to evaluate it. If you only appreciate what you know and only like what you appreciate.
Knowing that exceptional talent also requires technical expertise, Art tried to prepare his students to fulfill their potential as they continued their music education and musical careers.
After I joined his choir, he would bring live musicians, and we would watch these musicians perform. And from that, I learned that I wanted to be a bass player. So I went and bought a bass and showed up at school with the bass, and Mr. Porter right away started a lab band, like a stage band, so that we could benefit from playing big band arrangements. And then he hired me as his bass player, and I didn't know but a few songs, and he taught me hundreds of songs that I've used until now. Once when we were playing in this private club in Little Rock, Arkansas, it was frequented by this politician whose leanings were well known, and so we knew how he felt about, he was a bigoted guy, demagogue, and we knew how he felt. So what we did was we would donate his tips to the NAACP. Well, one day he found out about it, and so he came up to the bandstand screaming and raving and waving his arms and about to go and was going off, and Mr. Porter just said, everybody just sit here and just be cool, because and don't say anything. And then Mr. Porter stopped playing and just sat there and watched the guy, and the guy just chilled out, walked away. So from that I learned that you can do things like without fighting.
I first met Arthur Porter my first day in school, in the Horace Mann High School. I was not in a very good mood because I had been forced, because my father had changed jobs, to leave my high school in Memphis just before my 15th birthday party. So that first period of class, I was not exactly your smiling, enthusiastic student, but he asked me to audition. And there was going to be a big Thanksgiving concert when he was searching for a soloist. And he gave me the score, and I was chosen to do the solo. His influence on me throughout that year and a half that I spent in Horace Mann High School was great. First of all, he instilled in me an enormous love for many different kinds of music. He was my first introduction to jazz. We sang all sorts of, some classical music. We sang spirituals. But the most important thing was that he said to me, you won't sing very often solos in school because I don't want you to become commonplace. I want, when you're going to sing a solo, for the students to think that it's going to be a special event. And he was the very first person to really make me think that I had a very special talent. And without that support and without that belief in me, I wouldn't be where I am today.
Sterling Ingram joined Art as a music educator on the same faculty. Recognizing Sterling's fine teaching ability, Art chose him to instruct his son, Art Jr. Sterling insisted that the young musician acquire excellent technique. His driving demands for improved performance provided a perfect complement to a father's unreserved support.
He was never the kind of person that he would never tell me, this is what you need to do. When I was a kid, it was so important to be like him so much. One day, I was trying out for some all-state band or something, and I always wanted to be first chair to make him proud. It didn't happen. And I cried, and I cried, and I told Dad, I said, Dad, I'm sorry. He said, listen, you know, that's the farthest thing from my mind. I'm not concerned. He just wanted me to do well. I knew that he was there. When you know someone loves you and they care for you and you respect them and you love them, you look up to them. You follow their footsteps.
In music and entertainment, the doors open a lot easier for black kids. There's something that a musician feels inside that eliminates color. There's a communication between musicians that doesn't exist elsewhere. It's been that way for a very long time, and I think it's sincere.
Soon acknowledged as the resident star of the Arkansas music scene, Art Porter's extraordinary talent was constantly in demand. From society parties to country clubs to charitable events, his music entertained Arkansans everywhere.
You have to like people to entertain. You have to honestly like people, not just tolerate them. You have to appreciate their differences. It's simple, and the older you get, the simpler it seems.
The Art Porter Trio received many honors and awards as a top-notch performing unit. Several local musicians aspired to play with the legend, knowing that just being around Art Porter could get you noticed. Perhaps one of the most successful combinations was Carwin Pleasant and Larry Ross.
Often there was a setting at the Arkansas Arts Center that all of the local musicians and aspirants would come, and Art, of course, was one of the stalwarts, if you will. But he took notice to young musicians who were attempting to play the music and to play it well. And out of that whole setting, many of us got noticed and were somehow put together to play at different public functions. And so as a result of that, 5 of us somehow evolved together and became the New Directions Quintet. Out of that quintet, we actually went on to win the National Intercollegiate Jazz Festival. And as a part of winning this national event, we got a chance to spend a few weeks in Europe and play in various and sundry countries. And so it was all because of Art's positioning us at the Arkansas Arts Center to allow us a venue to play and to express ourselves, and for folk to take note that there were some young folk coming along who would keep the music alive. When we got back from the 8-week tour, it was when Art invited me to come and play percussions in the renowned Art Porter Trio.
In 1971, Art was recruited by Arkansas Educational Television to produce a 30-minute music program featuring African-American talent. His ability to find and help star quality talent became the basis for Art's involvement with the minor key.
Screening talent for minor key has been the hardest part of this business.
Many fine performers were showcased over the next 10 years, including Arkansans Gladys Gill, John Puckett, and Irene Crutchfield. Even the Porter children joined Dad for a few sets, earning the respect of the viewing public.
There were 3 things that you could count on from Art each Friday when we got ready to do the minor key. First of all, he was always going to be late because he always had too many irons in the fire. He was always helping other people, and this kind of got in his way sometimes. You could count on the fact that he was going to be unrehearsed. And thirdly, though, it was going to be one heck of a good show once we got it on tape.
Generally, Art would call me on the phone and give me the time frame, and then we would discuss whether we were doing ballads or standards, and we would talk about tempos, etc. And then we may go through the entire program one time, and it generally didn't take us but one take. We were very familiar with each other because we had played together in college.
Art was probably one of the most laid-back people I've ever been around. Nothing fazed him. He would handle the talent part of it and walk in and say, we're going to do this, and you know, that's the way it'd be. If it ran short, well, he'd just spill. You know, and I don't think I ever saw him flustered at anything.
Sometimes Art would show up with artists that we didn't even know were coming. It would be some big-name individuals that would really surprise the heck out of everybody. he would just show up with them. They'd come into town and come by to visit him. He knew they were coming, and here they would come to be on the minor key. But at the same time, Art never turned down those individuals locally here also who were good artists, but just not well known. And he always made sure that minor key served as a place where they could showcase their talent and certainly get the recognition that they deserved.
I remember even the time when the program was over and finished, maybe they continued to play and would just fade the music down, that it didn't stop at that point. It seemed like they were really cooking it at the time, and they just kept going for a while. And that's when people from the offices and everywhere came out in the studio and just stood around, and they were really just letting it all go, and we really enjoyed that part of it.
Art decided to leave the teaching profession in 1973 to earn a master's degree from Henderson State University and to concentrate on full-time performing.
I was really frightened, having to depend on entertainment for a living. I was hungry a few days. I've been fortunate. It's not an easy thing I do.
He continued to produce the minor key and received an additional grant to produce 10 30-minute television shows to air in 14 states. Porterhouse Cuts featured the Art Porter Trio playing music on various themes.
First time I heard Art was when I had been transferred to Little Rock from Atlanta in the early 70s. And whenever I went to a new town, either permanently or traveling, I always tried to find out where there was some jazz going on. Pretty soon I heard about Art playing at a place called the Sam Peck Hotel. My wife and I went there, and right there, you could almost sit on their lap, was the best jazz trio I'd ever heard. Whenever you can discover a gem like that who's, quote, unknown, you got a ringside seat. You don't have to go to some auditorium. So we'd go there, gosh, almost every week and listen to Art and Carwin and Larry Ross. So it looked like the Sam Peck was slowing down. I was talking with my wife, and we had also been going to a place called Cajun's Wharf, which was bringing in out-of-town entertainment at the time. Good stuff. But we went in and talked with the manager there and convinced the management that they should put Art in there and put him in there for a happy hour. And still they could book the out-of-town entertainment, and they did so. I was scared to death that if he lost his job at the Sam Peck, that it'd be all over. And then I'd have to buy a piano and put him in my living room.
Cajun's Wharf was open to everyone. Folks throughout the state journeyed to Little Rock to listen to the Music Man in person, many for the first time.
I wanted to be like Dad. That was me. I wanted to be like him. I mean, everything about him. And really, at that point, it had nothing to do with music as much as how he carried himself, the way he thought. And I think it was just the love that he surrounded me with. He took me everywhere. There was never a time I felt like I'm too busy for you or I'm too busy for that. He would always be open and giving time and always interested in what I was doing.
Art Jr. regularly joined his father at Cajun's Wharf. This experience playing with professionals helped to build his performance skills. Unfortunately, the ABC board took a dim view of a minor appearing in a place that served liquor. Enforcing the existing law, the board barred Art Jr. from Cajun's Wharf, even though his own father accompanied him. An appeal was made to then Attorney General Bill Clinton. Mr. Clinton investigated the situation and proposed a satisfactory solution that continued to protect minors while allowing talented family members to perform together. Act 321, referred to as the Art Porter Act, amended the law of 1914 to allow a child under 16 to be employed upon the stage in a theatrical performance in any saloon, provided that the child's parent or guardian is part of the same show and supervises the child.
My dad was a real true player. I mean, here's a man, and that was another thing. I learned so much about all kinds of music, and I think he had so much to do with that. Classical music, being able to read music, write music, understand all the theory of it. And how he did that, it was not, he never just knocked it or stuffed it down my throat. It's just that he did it so well and did it so easily and made it so magical and made it so fun.
Art Porter's professional success never diminished his community involvement. In 1976, he organized the Art Porter Singers, comprised of former Horace Mann students, spouses, and friends. Their first performance was of Christmas music at Bethel AME Church. The next year was their first performance of Handel's Messiah. Revisiting that sacred space created so long ago, Art conducted his great love once again. Unbeknown to most members, Mr. Porter routinely covered the expenses of guest soloists and others who just couldn't afford to participate. Through his generous sharing of his talent and resources, the Art Porter Singers' Messiah has become an ongoing Christmas tradition and sweet gift to the community.
It's sort of like family. People change. Standards don't. I look at the choir and some of the things we do, and it's just a kind of friendly reminder that some things still do exist, although they may be scarce or ignored.
The Singers became one of the few vocal groups to present the traditional Negro spiritual. By rescuing this near-lost music form, Art's foresight continues to enlighten the public. In recognition of Art's considerable contributions to the citizens of Arkansas, the state legislature honored him with a series of 5 certificates of merit. The first was awarded in 1977 when the trio was selected to represent the North American zone at Festac 77. Nigeria was the site of this international arts festival of multi-events. 74 countries were represented, participating in 10 categories. Bearing the official title of American Ambassador of Goodwill, Art quickly made himself available to the many performers who did not have accompanist.
As we arrived at the venue, a lot of the artisans came up, and they had some singers and whatnot, and they wanted to know if anybody in the group was a pianist. And nobody, and Art was always very modest. He was laid back, you know. And there was not a pianist in the group. And Carwin, our front PR guy, always said, yeah, here's a guy from Arkansas that's a pianist. And it really was interesting from there because one of the vocalists asked, well, do you know this song? And Art kind of, are you talking about this one? And he real quick. And she said, oh, yeah. And he simply asked her, well, what key? And I think she said C or something, but she really didn't know what key. And Art, as gracious as he was, always did not try to embarrass anyone. He said, well, I think it may be D. See if you can hit this pitch. And she did. And from there, it seems like the multitudes came up. Who is this guy from Arkansas?
Back home, Art was labeled a state music treasure. His performances with the Arkansas Symphony Orchestra, renowned talent Steve Allen, jazz singer Carmen McRae, native son Pharaoh Sanders, had many people asking the same question. Why did you stay in Arkansas?
Being on the road takes its toll. I don't like to travel, and I wouldn't like to be away from home 9 to 10 months out of a year. I've always known, in spite of what most people think, the glamour that's apparent isn't really real in the entertainment world.
The people of Arkansas wove this gracious talent into the fabric of their lives. Quietly, their enjoyment of his music became entwined with respect and a timeless sense that Art Porter always was and always will be the pinnacle of Arkansas entertainment.
Art was an icon, and there were musicians, and you could talk about this musician, and you could talk about that music, and you could talk about this bass player, or you could talk about that person. But then there was Art Porter, and he was in a category all of his own. He was a pure musician. He played music for the joy of playing the music and didn't make it darn if he was making 2 cents or $2 million. It had nothing to do with his performance. Every performance would be flawless, and I never could understand how a person could play that perfect every time.
He was the first choice to play for important state visits, including First Lady Rosalind Carter and Vice President Bush. When Bill Clinton became governor of Arkansas, the governor's mansion often rang with Porter music. Occasionally, the governor would sit in and jam. Many folks will argue that Art Porter's most significant moments weren't those spent with the rich and famous. Nursing homes, schools, prisons, hospitals, and charities were routinely part of his performance schedule. Above all, Art was a musician's musician. His ability to go from symphonic to blues to musical comedy to jazz made him a favorite with just about everybody.
Art was a musician's musician. From his West Side Story medley that we would do to, you know, the avant-garde type jazz and modern jazz. It was just a lot of fun. I really, really enjoyed playing with him. He always wanted to make sure that people left satisfied. He wanted them to leave happier and with a good feeling about music, more so than when they walked in the door or wherever they came to hear us play.
In 1983, Art did something for himself. He realized a lifetime dream when he opened Art's Place at the Sam Peck Hotel. The reviews were wonderful, making it a critical success, but Art's built-in generosity soon overshadowed the nightly receipts.
We soon found out that this was not going to work the way he wanted to do it. There was just a lot of money involved and a lot of things that he just wanted to do. I think most of his was in appreciation, saying thank you for thinking about Art's Place and thank you for coming by. I want to do a lot for you. I want to do as much as I can. Your coach, your cars, and so forth will all be protected. I'd like for you to come again. And this is what he tried to do, but it just did not work out that way financially.
When Eureka Springs decided to sponsor an annual jazz festival in 1986, they contacted Arkansas's jazz man to head the list of performers. That year, Art's fifth child, Sean, was born. And like his son, with each yearly performance, the Eureka Springs Jazz Festival grew.
The most important thing music has given me over the years has been the understanding that there are many viewpoints and opinions about any matter, and one is as valid as the other, especially in playing jazz and in playing a particular song. Musicians improvise over the same melody. They're all saying something different, and they're all correct. I transfer that tolerance to every aspect of life.
This widely acclaimed festival continues to attract high-profile musicians and large audiences from around the country. With a multitude of performances, honors, and awards to his credit, including a governor's appointment to the Arkansas Entertainers Hall of Fame Board, Art was selected to be honored by the National Kidney Foundation.
We had a few surprises for him, but basically he was in charge that night, and he played the most beautiful music. It was an outstanding evening, and one of the highlights was that then Governor Bill Clinton was invited as one of the speakers to, we had several speakers who were there to honor Art and to reminisce and to tell how he had influenced their lives. And so Governor Clinton was there, and I remember he walked through the doors of the ballroom with his entourage of state troopers. And then he took my arm. I'll never forget this. He looped his arm through mine, and he whispered and said, "Does Art know I'm coming?" And I said, yes, he does. He just doesn't know exactly what's going to happen. And he said, well, this is totally unrehearsed. And I said, well, absolutely. I said, I think it's going to be wonderful. And so they played together. They played Summertime, and let me tell you, it brought the house down.
By 1991, son Art Jr. was planning the release of his own debut album, Pocket City. Based in Chicago and often appearing at the Cotton Club, Art Jr. was on the roster for a European tour to Belgium, the Netherlands, and Germany.
When I heard Art Jr. was going to be on the tour, I was real happy because I had played with him before. He's the best saxophone player. I couldn't believe that one guy could take a stage over like he does.
At the last minute, his pianist backed out. He had to find someone who was professionally competent enough to stand in with no rehearsals and be available to leave within a few days. The natural choice was his dad.
After 30 years of leading my own group, it was quite an experience going on tour as a sideman with my son. I didn't say anything unless asked.
We never talked about it, but when we played together, there was magic. He knew where I was emotionally and spiritually, and I knew where he was. And you can hear that. I don't care where we were, how long we've been apart. When we came together, and there was nothing else like that, and it still isn't.
In September of 1992, Art Porter was diagnosed with inoperable lung cancer.
It was a shock. Then I realized it was reality, and I had to deal with it. My belief in God has been the real foundation of my attitude. I live one day at a time, and I'm thankful for each one I do. It has given me a better appreciation for life and living and what you do, how important it is to be positive.
A stunned Arkansas reeled with the news of Art's tragic illness. Undergoing radiation treatment and battling debilitating pain, he continued to play wherever he was scheduled. Longtime friend, President-elect Bill Clinton, invited father and son to perform during the presidential inauguration festivities. In his weakening condition, Art traveled to Washington to participate in the inaugural prayer service. A lasting tribute to a great musician was held at the Robinson Music Center to honor the accomplishments of a man who captured the hearts of Arkansas.
The most moving and emotional moment of that night was when Art Jr. and Dad performed together. You could hear a pin drop in that auditorium. It was really an unforgettable night. And for weeks after that, Dad would walk around in just awe at the outpouring of love that was shown to him. And I can remember him telling me, Benita, you did such a good job putting this show on. And I tell him, Dad, it wasn't me, it was you. All I had to do was mention his name and the doors just started opening and people just came pouring out of those doors. I don't know if he ever really knew how much people loved him, not because he was a gifted musician, but because he was such an extraordinary human being.
Art Porter made his final appearance with his beloved choir in the Art Porter Trio for the Hot Springs Jazz Festival. Wearing a pain monitor and needing assistance to move about, he finished his career in a gesture of community service.
The Art Porter singers had their performance, and finally the program was over. We were walking down the stairs from the hotel, and I asked him, I said, well, how are you feeling now? And he mentioned his back was hurting some. I said, we're not going to try this anymore. Okay, Eugene? We're not going to try this anymore. When we got home that time, I let everyone know he won't be doing this anymore.
On July 22nd, 1993, Art Porter Sr. died, leaving behind a living legacy of a life devoted to his family, friends, city, and state. Art Porter, a music treasure.
Art Porter was devoted to his family, to his music, and to the state of Arkansas and its people. He could have had greater fame and fortune had he left our state, but he wanted to remain close to those he loved. His music touched our souls and stirred our spirits. He raised a son and namesake who also became a brilliant musician. Art Porter was one of our greatest musical talents from Arkansas. He was, by any standard, a great jazz pianist. But to me, he was more than a great musician. He was also my good friend. I'm proud that he and his group were able to play at my first inauguration. I missed them at my second inauguration, and I still miss him very much. He was one of a kind, and his smile can still light up my room.
This project is supported in part by a grant from the Arkansas Humanities Council and the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Arkansas Arts Council, an agency of the Department of Arkansas Heritage, the Governor's Discretionary Fund, 1996, and Mrs. Elizabeth Ann Ramsey.